In the 1990s, the Western world was enraptured by the release of one incredibly popular kids show, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Featuring color-coded costumed superheroes, giant robots, and over-the-top villains, Power Rangers blasted into the stratosphere with a long line of sequels and almost oppressive merchandising. What few people knew at the time was that the show was actually based on an even bigger franchise from Japan, the Super Sentai series, which Saban Entertainment pulled heavily from for costumes, plot lines, and even straight-up footage. Super Sentai is one of Japan's biggest superhero properties and a shining example of the Tokusatsu genre. If you're not familiar with the term, Tokusatsu is a film genre largely defined by its copious use of special effects. Big explosions, actors in suits, and destructible miniature sets are common features of Tokusatsu, and while it's a term that can be used to refer to any film that utilizes special effects, it's become a style in its own right, and one that is fairly unique to Japan. Tokusatsu first gained renown in the West thanks to kaiju films like the iconic Godzilla, but probably the most well-known examples of the genre come from superhero shows like Kamen Rider, Ultraman, and of course, the Super Sentai series by way of Power Rangers. Like any kid born in the 90s, I fell in love with Power Rangers during its heyday, and while that love didn't last, it did eventually lead me to jumping into the Super Sentai series and Tokusatsu as a whole. The franchise charmed me with its copious use of makeshift special effects, flashy and bombastic characters, and fun action choreography. Yes, it's a kids show aimed at kids, but the best of these shows always had more than that to offer, and Super Sentai slowly went from a short nostalgic trip to an actual favorite of mine. It's unfortunately been a very long time since I've been that much into Super Sentai and Tokusatsu as a whole, but with the recent news of the franchise coming to an end, after being on the air since 1975, I felt like there was no way that I could let it pass without talking about it. For the uninitiated, Super Sentai might look like some cheap bargain bin kids show with tacky costumes and amateur cinematography, but it's actually one of Japan's biggest institutions. The franchise has been going non-stop for 50 years, with only a single break in 1978. Neither Ultraman, Metal Heroes, nor Kamen Rider have been able to boast such a long-running record. If we extend out to include non-Tokusatsu productions, only a few series like the Guinness World Record holder Sazai-san have managed to run for longer. There are fully grown adults in Japan, some with kids of their own, that have never lived through a year without a new Super Sentai show on the air, until this year. The result of this longevity is that Super Sentai has become a massive part of Japanese culture. If you've ever seen a squad of highly bombastic characters, whether they be in color-coded costumes or not, you're almost definitely looking at a Super Sentai reference. We have whole anime and manga dedicated to either lampooning or parodying the concept, and even standard superhero anime are going to give the series some kind of referential nod. Super Sentai is as important to the concept of the Japanese superhero as Superman and Batman are, and as such, the franchise ending isn't just the end of a long-running show, it's the end of a massive cultural touchstone. Of course, for people in the West, I'm sure hearing this news doesn't feel all that impactful if you've heard about it at all. Super Sentai is almost a complete unknown here, and even its analog Power Rangers fares little better nowadays. This isn't surprising to hear. Tokusatsu as a genre couldn't really ride the wave that anime and manga were on, even with the popularity of Power Rangers giving it a boost. For some of you watching, it might even be the first time you're hearing words like Super Sentai or Tokusatsu. In my case, however, things were different. As I mentioned before, I was a huge fan of Power Rangers as a kid, and while I would eventually lose interest in keeping up with the show, I always regarded it as a fond part of my childhood memories. It's those memories that would eventually trigger my interest when I discovered the show Samurai Sentai Shinkenger sometime in college. At the time, I was already fully aware that Super Sentai was the basis for Power Rangers, but I had never really taken the time to jump into the source material myself. Shinkenger was a series that had already been long finished by the time I discovered it, so it seemed like a pretty good jumping point to me. To be honest, I probably only expected to watch a couple episodes of the show, get bored, and then move on to other things. Surprisingly, I found myself enjoying the series so much that I ended up binging the entire thing. Nostalgia was definitely part of the reason, but at the same time, I just enjoyed the bombast and energy the show had, and its story was a lot more compelling than what I would have expected from a show aimed at kids. Shinkenger remains one of my favorite Super Sentai series, and while I wouldn't say it's the best in the franchise, it's gotta be up there. Once I finished Shinkenger, I basically jumped into any Super Sentai series I could find and binged them all. From there, I moved into the Kamen Rider series, as well as any Tokusatsu related media I could find. This actually wasn't too hard to do at the time, as my jump into Tokusatsu actually coincided with what I felt was a pretty notable rise in the popularity of the genre in the West, even without any official releases. I was a dyed-in-the-wool Tokusatsu fan, and while I may have lapsed in that, these shows still have a strong grasp on my heart. I was deep into Tokusatsu for several years, but after a certain point, my interest in newer Tokusatsu shows started to wane, and eventually I just stopped watching. It happens, I'm not really the type of person to stay wholly obsessed with one thing, and honestly, at the time it was starting to get tougher to keep up with the newer shows. Despite that, Tokusatsu, and specifically Super Sentai, always held a big place in my heart, which is why it was such a shock to me to see them announce that the series was ending. It's probably hard for any adult, even one that's an anime fan, to really understand what could possibly be intriguing about a bunch of people in suits play fighting in a bunch of empty quarries and abandoned parking lots. I understand. From a first glance, even modern Tokusatsu shows look pretty cheap and amateurish compared to other superhero productions with more budget. However, I actually consider Tokusatsu's low-budget production style to be a big part of its charm in the same way B-movies can still garner cult followings despite being made cheaply. The various techniques these productions utilize to create a variety of effects is fun to watch in action, and while it could definitely feel a little amateurish at times, it never diminished the quality of the overall product. Even the goofy CGI that modern productions use doesn't take away from that energy, and I'll always love noticing the little tricks these shows use to create certain shots. It doesn't always look realistic, no, but in my opinion, that only adds to the genre's charm points. Another charm point that is more specific to Super Sentai is the level of energy and showmanship portrayed in every episode. Around the time that I was getting into the franchise, I was starting to grow a little tired of how pragmatic Western superhero films were becoming. I never disliked any of these movies, of course. The Dark Knight is probably my favorite superhero film of all time, but it is also a movie strongly rooted in pragmatism and realistic portrayals of how a vigilante superhero like Batman would operate. MCU movies like Iron Man and the Avengers continued this line of pragmatism, and while I enjoyed those movies, I kind of felt like something was missing. Super Sentai provided that something in the form of pageantry, which I know is used often as a derogative, but it was something I really appreciated seeing, regardless of how unrealistic it might be. Long transformation scenes, dramatic poses, shouting out attacks. Sure, they're silly things you'd never see in a real fight, but they match well with the bombastic, energetic nature of the genre. Adding to this is the complete willingness the Super Sentai franchise has to jump into whatever concept, genre, or setting their writers cooked up. Whether it be a futuristic police drama, a supernatural martial arts battle between good and evil, or a silly sci-fi car-based comedy, the show always went at it full bore. Because of that, you never really knew what to expect from a new Sentai series, and even rehashing old themes could still net you a few surprises. Not every concept worked, of course, but it definitely allowed what could have been a very by-the-numbers franchise to add some diversity. You might knock how much the props in Tokusatsu shows look exactly like toys, and I couldn't fault you for that. Toys have, for a very long time, been a core part of merchandising for the Super Sentai series, and there's no better way to advertise them than to put them in the show itself, even if it makes the whole thing look a little tacky. Certainly, some shows can take it a little too far for the merchandising and advertisement, but hey, at least the designs are fun, and with years of practice, they've gotten pretty good at making these toys look cool, as well as tying them into whatever theme or concept they have going on for the current series. You can fault the Super Sentai franchise for a lot of things, but not for a lack of imagination or passion. The most important thing though was that the Super Sentai series was always fun, more than anything else. They may not have had the deepest plot lines or the most emotional stories, but they always made sure you could have fun with whatever they had to work with, and they didn't worry about looking silly or anything like that, which obviously shows in the way they designed their monsters and props. It's the franchise's greatest strength, Tokusatsu's greatest strength in my opinion, and also why Super Sentai has managed to last for so many years. It's for all these reasons and more that I'm really bummed by Toei's decision to end the series. Yes, I haven't been watching the series all that much, but there was always a small comfort in knowing that if I ever did want to go back, Super Sentai would be there. The franchise has its highs and lows, but every series always did its best to live up to the bombast and showmanship it was known for. Knowing it will be gone for the foreseeable future leaves a sort of hole in my heart, as silly as that sounds. Having said all that, I can't really say that ending the series is necessarily a bad idea. Super Sentai is still a massive part of Japanese pop culture, but I can't help but feel like it's lost a bit of its charm in recent years. I'm speaking from someone who's standing on the outside when it comes to recent Sentai series, of course, but at a glance, it feels like the writers are struggling to come up with new ideas, which, considering the franchise's long life, might be something that's becoming harder and harder to do. My feelings about this come mostly from an attempt I made last year to get back into the Super Sentai series with one of the more recent entries, Osama Sentai King Oger. It's a Super Sentai show set in a fantasy world where the main rangers are all kings of their respective countries, with the exception of the main character, Gira, a theatrical commoner who mysteriously has the ability to use the Oger caliber to transform into Kuwagata Oger. It's certainly a more broad-minded and ambitious Sentai story than what I was used to, which is why I wanted to give it a watch. I gave King Oger the best shot I could, and I did enjoy some aspects of it. The characters were pretty fun, and the Rangers acting more independently rather than as a team for much of the show was honestly pretty interesting. However, I found the storyline and dialogue were a little weak, and while Tokusatsu isn't necessarily known for turning out tremendous performances, the acting felt a little too amateurish this time around. I ended up losing interest halfway, and I haven't had the urge to revisit the show. Some of you might say that it's just been so long since I've last seen a Toku show that I've kind of lost perspective in what to expect from them, but I don't think that's true. See, around the same time, I also wanted to watch a modern Kamen Rider alongside King Oger, and I chose Geats. Geats does have some of the same issues that King Oger does, but to a much lighter extent, and overall it was a much better show with a stronger cast, better writing, and more unique transformations and powers. I wouldn't say Geats is an all-timer when it comes to the Kamen Rider series, but I still had a better time with it overall. Now, King Oger is just one show, mind you, but speaking personally, I never found myself compelled to watch many of the other Sentai shows that had come out in the same time frame. Unfortunately, it seems like that disinterest was shared by a lot of the Japanese audience, with Super Sentai merchandise revenue dropping year after year. I won't pretend like I know the reason why myself. Maybe the gimmicks were getting a little too out there, or maybe the writing was actually getting noticeably worse. But I think it's hard to deny the franchise has been falling behind its peers in recent years. I think the biggest sign of Super Sentai's decline can be seen when you compare it to where Kamen Rider is nowadays. Despite never getting a long-lasting Western adaptation the way Super Sentai did, Kamen Rider has nevertheless managed to position itself as the go-to show to watch for modern Tokusatsu fans, which is in no small part thanks to Shout Factory and their constant efforts to officially localize the series through their YouTube channel Tokusatsu. You can even watch the newest series, Kamen Rider Zets there, which is the first time Western fans have been able to experience a new Kamen Rider alongside the Japanese fans. Meanwhile, Super Sentai has a much smaller presence on the channel. There are a few live stream marathons here and a couple of standalone episodes there, but no full series like Kamen Rider has. You can't even watch the newest Super Sentai series here, which is a huge missed opportunity for such a massive institution. With all the big moves to bring Tokusatsu to the West, you'd think they'd take advantage of this to push one of their biggest flagships more. At the time we were first getting news about Super Sentai ending, I remember seeing many people theorizing on forums and threads that Toei was ending the Super Sentai franchise in order to get out of its symbiotic connection with Power Rangers. Since Power Rangers was meant to be an adaptation of the Super Sentai series, any attempt to bring Super Sentai to the West would sort of be in conflict with that, which could have explained Super Sentai's lack of presence on the Tokusatsu channel. That ended up being debunked pretty quickly once actual details about the news came out, but it did sound pretty convincing at the time. I haven't really touched on modern day Power Rangers, but to say that it's in an uneven state is an understatement. New Power Ranger shows are a minute speck on the fresco of American pop culture, and as an adaptation, Power Rangers hasn't managed to adapt a single Super Sentai show from the 2020s, despite the most recent show releasing in 2023 and multiple teams being skipped for adaptation outright. If you hear any talk about Power Rangers nowadays, it's usually nostalgia bait for the original Mighty Morphin series, and even the newer shows can't help themselves from pulling from the same bag of tricks. If Power Rangers really is the reason why we can't get new Sentai shows on YouTube like Kamen Rider, and I'm sure there's some other details in the mix as well, it wouldn't be too hard to imagine Toei wanting to end such a relationship. That's all fan theory, of course, and in the end, none of that really changes the fact that Super Sentai is ending. It's a real shame because despite all of its flaws and stagnation, the franchise is still such an indelible part of Japanese culture, and it ending is the end of an era in itself. Sure, the show was always an excuse to sell toys and provide a launch pad for budding actors, but the creators and writers always did their best to make something of value with whatever they had, and I'm sad to see it go. However, I also feel really excited about the future when it comes to Tokusatsu as well. 2026 is going to be the first year without a Super Sentai show, and while the replacement appears to be a return to the classic Metal Hero series, a franchise with a legacy in its own right, there's still plenty of room for new ideas. I've been slowly making my way back into Toku as a whole this past year, and while I'm still not back to the voracious pace I was at the peak of my Tokusatsu fandom, I'd still love to see what this new series has to offer. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get a Super Sentai revival like we did for Kamen Rider all those years ago. The main point is, there's still a lot of exciting things down the line for Tokusatsu fans, and I can't wait to see where it all goes. Thanks for watching. I'm sad to see Super Sentai go, but I also can't wait to see what new projects we're going to see next. It won't necessarily be amazing, but surely something new will keep things fresh. What do you guys think about the end of the Super Sentai franchise? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to catch what I've got coming up, and I'll see you next time.